Good morning, everyone. Happy Friday. Welcome back. It's lovely to see you. We're so pleased to be joined by Jen Holzer this morning. I know that her topic is of real interest to a lot of us, and there's a lot of excitement about the research she's going to share with us this morning. So before I hand it over, let me introduce Jen so you know all of the wonderful things she's done that have brought her to this spot. So Dr. Holzer is a postdoctoral fellow and an adjunct professor at the Environmental Sustainability Research Center. She holds a Ph.D. in environmental studies from the Technion Israel Institute of Technology and an MPA in environmental science and policy from Columbia University. Jen studies knowledge production and governance of social-ecological systems in service of fostering transformations towards sustainability. Her doctoral research evaluated the no-do gap in social-ecological research in Europe, providing recommendations that fed directly into recent changes in research programs. Previously, Jen was a project manager for climate change mitigation and energy efficiency programs in California and across the U.S. And today she's going to talk to us about empathy, highly sensitive people, connections to nature, and what that all means for environmental sustainability thinkers. So welcome, we're so pleased you're here.
Thank you, Jess. Thank you for inviting me, Dr. Blythe, I should say. And thank you, everybody, for being here. So yes, I'm going to talk about highly sensitive people, and I'm giving you the bottom line of our research right up front. They do connect more strongly to nature, and I'm going to discuss a little bit about what that means for sustainability. And I'm going to do something new that I'm a little nervous about, but I'm going to do a little introduction about myself that's very personal. So I'm named after my great-grandma, Jenny Holzer. I took the name Sadeh when I got married, and that means field in Hebrew. And I grew up in the Nape territory. You can see the really light green up at the top there, and that's New Jersey in the United States. And my ancestors are Ashkenazi Jews, so that's Jewish people originating from the dark blue part, and those are other Jewish groups. I know a lot about Jewish history too, but I'm a second-generation settler to Turtle Island, and I'm grateful to work here and be in relationship with people from across many traditional and unceded territories, including this territory, the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe peoples. And I'm honored to live and work on this land, and I'm committed to reconciliation and decolonization. So I wanted to first kind of just think about our assumptions, or just think about my assumptions. This is a paper that I really like from some colleagues back from where I did my Ph.D. And they say here, reducing the biodiversity crisis largely depends on improving people's attitudes and behaviors towards nature, which are in turn largely threatened by the extinction of experience. And the extinction of experience is this term from Robert Pyle's essay. You might be aware of it or not, just meaning that our opportunities for spending time in nature and having it accessible to us is becoming threatened. So that opportunity of being immersed in nature is threatened, and if we lose that, we're really losing the extinction of potential experiences. So I want to just first question this, because this is definitely how I think too. So scholars really, first of all, everyone kind of basically agrees humans are more disconnected from nature than ever before, and this of course has a lot of implications for human health and well-being, for how we feel about nature and how we treat nature. These are just a smattering of books that I found online. There are many, many books coming out on this topic now. So if you'll excuse this vast oversimplification, but I think it's easier for us to understand just a really simple line. So this is kind of how I think. Okay, we have more experiences in nature, then we'll connect more to nature. If we connect more to nature, we'll do more pro-environmental behaviors, and if we do more pro-environmental behaviors, we can make everything better. We can have transformations to sustainability. We can save the world, right? So, okay, so let's question each of these based on the research. Okay, so here I want to say, we know it's not that simple and it's not linear at all, and these are really complicated social-ecological systems, so I wanted just to show a diagram that was a little bit more complicated that shows that it's a system. So this is kind of how we're thinking. This current situation where we have the extinction of experience happening and we don't have the best relationships with nature, with animals, with other species, and this is leading to unsustainable norms and values, and that in turn is leading to unsustainable behaviors and policies, and we really want to shift that to a more sustainable vision, where we would have more contact with nature, meaningful contact with nature, that leads to a non-anthropocentric view. We're not in the center, but rather we're part of the system and the natural world. And that will in turn lead to more sustainable norms and values, and that in turn will lead to more sustainable behaviors and policies, right? So this is probably not new, and it's not, Aldo Leopold, I put this quote because I think he said it really nicely in 1949. We abuse land because we regard it as a commodity belonging to us. When we see land as a community to which we belong, we may begin to use it with love and respect. So that's the kind of transformation that I'm talking about when I talk about sustainability transformations. And then something I've been thinking about a lot is just, but everybody's different. So if we try to figure out how can we inspire or how can we trigger transformations to sustainability, we can't just think of everybody as like one big mass of people, right? We have to acknowledge differences in cultures and contexts and think about how we can research that. Okay, so this is what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to hit like a few different subtopics within this. So nature connections, pro-environmental behavior, speak a little bit about the framework of leverage points towards sustainability, which you might be familiar with. I'll talk about our research that found that highly sensitive people connect more strongly to nature. And then really what I'm really interested in is where are we going to go from here and what kind of implications does that have? So that's what I'm going to talk about today. Okay, so what we've already said and know, but this time with graphics, that across the whole, people are spending less time in nature, and especially children. So less outdoor activity. The percentage of children who have never climbed a mountain or caught bugs or watched birds or gone fishing has declined, and this is showing the difference from 1998 to 2009, so that's also a while ago. And also this bar chart showing visitation to national parks in the United States, so declining over time, so showing less time spent outdoors in nature. And this was an interesting study that looked at the percentage of nature-related words in song lyrics from 1950 through 2010. So they looked for 186 different nature-related words, so general terms, and then names of flowers, names of trees, and names of birds. So they found that for every 3 nature-related words in popular songs from the 1950s, there's only slightly more than 1 nature-related word in popular songs today. So this is the sad story that we probably are already aware of, but this was a cool study and a cool way to show it. And this is a study I really like as well. They looked at dog walkers, dog owners, cat owners, and people that didn't have a pet, and found that dog owners went outside more often and to more diverse places. And then they also found that dog owners were more closely related to nature, but they did not have any greater environmental awareness, and they did not have any greater environmental attitudes. So that was interesting for me. That's something like I was keeping in the back of my mind. So, okay, so experiences in nature, based on that research, and there's much more research about it, do lead to connections to nature. And now let's keep going along this pathway. So there are many different ways that researchers define connection to nature. And this, for me, is a really nice, it's something really novel because it's showing we connect to nature in different ways, maybe with our head, heart, and hands. And they look at it in these 5 ways. So from the external to the internal, starting with material, things that you consume with nature, experiential, the direct interactions that you have with the natural environment, cognitive, your knowledge or awareness about the environment, or your kind of general attitude toward it, emotional, how you feel about it, do you feel attached or empathic toward nature, and philosophical, like it's the most internal and the deepest, is your perspective or worldview on what nature is and why it matters, what your relationship or what human relationship to it should be. So this is really nice, I think, because it brings a multifaceted view of the human connection to nature. And this is the framework that we use for our study. And this same study also, it has this interesting insight, I think, in how it says, okay, across the nature connections literature, some people are talking about nature connections as a consequence of urbanization, of reduced access to green spaces, of changing social norms and the rise of technology. Some research talks about it as a cause of human happiness and well-being and giving rise to stewardship. And other kind of more, psychological and medical studies talk about it as a treatment where, for example, in Japan, you can get a prescription from a physician to go forest bathing, as a treatment for depression or anxiety, something like that. And also using citizen initiatives to foster environmental knowledge and concern and behavior. Okay, so if you think back to the dog walker study and you imagine somebody walking their dog, and maybe they even live by a really nice park, but they have their cell phone in one hand and they're kind of like got the leash here and the cell phone here, and like, are they really immersed in nature and are they experiencing it? So that is kind of the critique that these researchers bring. And one of the big ideas they bring in this paper, which is a wonderful paper, is that it has to be a meaningful interaction in nature, and that's the key. So you have to immerse your senses. You have to connect on an emotional level, experience something like beauty or meaning or compassion, and that is what is going to trigger real nature connection that brings the benefits of mental and physical well-being and pro-nature behaviors and pro-environmental behaviors generally. So pro-nature behaviors meaning like wanting to go for a walk in the woods, and pro-environmental behaviors might be things that you do in your home. Okay, so we're moving along that simplistic line diagram because this is a really big study that looked at 26 different, or I should say a meta-analysis that looked at 26 different studies and over 13,000 individuals. And they found, yes, nature connections are associated with pro-environmental behaviors. So there we've established it. The relationship between connection to nature and pro-environmental behavior was positive, significant, moderately sized. Individuals more strongly connected to nature demonstrated greater engagement in what they self-reported as their pro-environmental behaviors across gender and location and age. And feeling deeply connected to nature influences how individuals treat it and has implications for increasing general pro-environmental behavior and biodiversity conservation. So I should say that's in the words of the authors of this meta-analysis. And that was a study done on adults and university students and children. So it's a very big and I think kind of the most comprehensive study that we have on that specific subject to date. So, okay. So I think we've established experiences in nature do lead to connection to nature, and connection to nature do lead to pro-environmental behaviors. So now I think we are getting to the trickier part. And this is where I want to talk about this idea and conceptual framework of leverage points, system leverage points for sustainability. So is the group familiar with this? Have you? No. Okay.
We haven't covered it formally in anything.
Okay. Because I know a lot of the colleagues talk about this a lot, but basically the idea is thinking about levers and leverage points. So looking for, first of all, conceptualizing it as a complex system. And within that complex system, if you want to change something, you can think of intervening at shallower leverage points in which you would change specific small things about the system, or you could intervene in using a deeper leverage point, and that would be something that triggers a system-wide change. So it would change the entire system, and that's kind of like the holy grail that researchers are trying to think about, what are those deeper system leverage points? So this paper, Ives et al. Paper from 2018, looks at those 5 types of nature connections and says that material and experiential, those are kind of the shallow ones, and that might change certain aspects of the system, but if we get to make changes in the cognitive and emotional and philosophical areas, and that's like really the way people see the world and experience the world in their perspective generally. That's what's going to make a transformation. That's what's going to really change the system. So that's another big idea that we're bringing into this research. So from there, that's just, this is just a conceptual framework we were thinking about a lot. I was thinking about it a lot, and I was thinking about this together with the idea of everybody's different. Like, how can we think about different subpopulations and how they interact differently with these concepts, or might have different reactions to different interventions and things like that. So I was thinking about culture, and so I was looking at different studies about how culture affects pro-environmental attitudes and environmental concern and these kinds of things. So environmental concern is closely correlated with national wealth, and that's on a national level, not individual wealth. And the strength of the relationship between environmental concern and pro-environmental behavior does vary across societies. So that was a big study. There's not just one, there are multiple studies, but the study I'm talking about looked at 32 different countries and found that the strength of the relationship is weaker in societies characterized by more distrust and belief in external control and that have a more present orientation, so just focused on the present moment. And the strength of the relationship between environmental concern and pro-environmental behavior is stronger in societies with higher individualism and looseness or flexibility in the society generally. And there are some other studies about place attachment, which is kind of a whole area of research on its own, but related. And place attachment has a moderate effect on pro-environmental behavior. The effect is larger in collectivist versus more individualist societies. And the effect is larger for tourists than for residents, which I thought was interesting too. So this was all very interesting, but it wasn't like the thing for me that I wanted to look at. But then some others in our lab are looking at personality traits, and that started to get interesting for me. So openness to experience is a personality trait that's related to pro-environmental tendencies, and to a lesser degree, honesty, humility, and agreeableness. So that's interesting to know. It's interesting research. And then I moved to a new house, and I wanted to get some new plants. And I was talking with my partner, and he didn't want any plants. And I said, well, like, we have to have plants. That's part of what makes it a home. And as we talked about it, I understood that if there was a chance that the plants were going to wilt or die, it was like too upsetting for him, and he just didn't want them there. So that made me think about someone I knew who was a therapist who specialized in highly sensitive people, and that's how I started to look at this, and it became very interesting to me, obviously personally, but also for the research. So sensory processing sensitivity is pretty well defined in the psych literature. It's not the same as sensory processing disorder. This is not a disorder. It's a trait that describes about 1/3 of the human population, and not just the human population. It's been described in over 100 species. So this is a whole world of research of its own. So this is very interesting to me. Basically, highly sensitive people have greater sensitivity to environmental and social stimuli and have more strong, more emotional reactions. They can become overwhelmed by excessive stimulation or the need for cognitive processing. And whereas they used to think of high sensitivity in like either you have it or you don't, today they think about it more in a spectrum, and there's 3 distinct groups, low, medium, and high, which they call them orchids, tulips, and dandelions. So when I talk about highly sensitive people, I'm talking about that high orchid group, the top 30% pretty much. And I'm going to go through it in a little more depth just so you get a picture of who they are or we are, because it's about 1/3 of the population, so you definitely know people for whom this is true. So DOES is the acronym that they use for the 4 indicators of HSP. So D is depth of processing, meaning that they experience a rich, complex inner life and are deeply moved by the arts and music or smells, and they have strong connection with plants, nature, and the animal world. They have an active imagination and are usually very creative and have a natural capacity for reflection and self-inquiry and self-awareness. And the O is over-arousal, so just feeling really easily overwhelmed or overstimulated or stressed. Can find it unpleasant to have a lot going on at once or have to do a lot in a short amount of time, and they often need more downtime or alone time to kind of recuperate from sensory overload. The E is emotional responsivity or empathy. They're easily affected by stimulation in the environment, bright lights, strong smells, background noise. They often need to exit overstimulating environments sooner rather than later, and they have an ability to notice a lot of detail and notice details with more precision and can notice slight shifts in tone of voice or facial expressions, nonverbal gestures, and things like that, so very attuned to their situation. And the S is for sensitivity to subtle stimuli, so just a finely tuned nervous system combined with a tendency to react really quickly to people, situations, feedback, criticism, and perceived threats. Okay, so we're getting an idea of what highly sensitive people are like. Sensitivity is shaped about half and half by genetics and the environment. I said it's identified in more than 100 other species and is thought, or it's pretty much agreed upon that it confers survival benefits, and that's why, but it wouldn't confer survival benefits if the entire population was like that. So, and it's related to a specific personality profile, which they're still doing a lot of research on, and this is like pretty new research, but it is related to high neuroticism and high openness to experience. So it's like light bulb, high openness to experience. Also people who have are more likely to have pro-environmental tendencies related to openness of experience. So that's interesting. And another really key thing that's interesting for this research is that highly sensitive people are more reactive to adverse situations, but also they're more receptive to a positive, supportive environment, or having like it being cared for well, basically. So that's interesting. Like for me, when I think about trying to design interventions or trying to design policies or programs that might target highly sensitive people specifically. So for the research that we did, the hypotheses were first that highly sensitive individuals, you already know kind of the answer, so it's not that exciting now to hear about it, but I'm going to tell you how we did the study. But the first hypothesis was that highly sensitive people are more likely to connect to nature than non-highly sensitive people. And the second was that they would report deeper connections, the cognitive, emotional, and philosophical connections, more than the non-HSPs, but they wouldn't differ with respect to the shallower connections. So that's what we went in thinking. So we did an online survey. Oh, okay. So there's a 27 item scale. Oh, what I wanted to do here, that's okay. Okay. I might go, if we have time at the end, because I wanted to ask you the questions that we did, but this is a previous version of the presentation, but that's okay. So instead of using the 27-item scale to test for sensitivity, we used the 9-item scale, and the researchers who developed that scale also recommend to control for certain other things, like to make sure that it's not a mental illness, for example, that is leading them to have those traits, those qualities. And then we also measured the 5 nature connections. And we used a scale that was already developed, and then we adapted it a little bit because the way they measured material connection was not exactly in line with the 5 connections to nature. We wanted to change it a little bit. And we surveyed 306 people. We had a lot of male respondents, which was kind of interesting and unusual, but across age groups, across income levels, mostly university, people who have been to university, mostly people who live in urban centers and less so suburban dwellers and less so rural dwellers. And these are just examples of questions that we asked. So for the material connection to nature, I reduce, reuse, and recycle items rather than buying new ones. For experiential, I like to get outdoors whenever I get the chance. For cognitive, protecting nature is an important part of who I am, so you kind of see how it's getting a little deeper. For the emotional connection, feeling connected to nature helps me deal with everyday stress. And philosophical, human well-being depends upon living in harmony with nature. Okay, so here are the results. So you can see low, medium, and high, low, medium, and high for each of the types of connections to nature. So it's pretty, the results are pretty clear, and we were pretty excited when we saw this, because you can just see it breaks down pretty perfectly. The people who are less sensitive are less connected, and the people who are more sensitive are more connected. And you can see also in the scatter plot, so this is, it's a little hard to see maybe, but it's material, experiential, cognitive, emotional, and philosophical. And I'll just show you the composite score because I think that's easier to see. But basically what I'm trying to show is that it's pretty scattered when you're looking at the low sensitive people in the left part. And then it gets kind of more along the line as you go to the top. So as the people get more sensitive, there's less variability in their scores. Okay, those are the results. That was the study that we did so far. And in the meantime, somebody else did a similar study, so I want to present that too. So it's not just me. You don't have to like take my word for it. You can also see this paper came out, I think, May of last year, and found that high sensitivity is related to higher connectedness to nature, and they used just a different definition, kind of a classic definition, the sense of belonging to the natural world. And they also found that high sensitivity was related to higher animal affinity, assessed in terms of stewardship and protection of animals. Okay, so here, if we think back to that linear thing and trying to get to the save the world part, okay, so what role will highly sensitive people, or what role can they hold in transitioning to sustainability? So my hunch, and this is what I would like to research in the future, is that either because they're so sensitive, they're going to get really bogged down by all the doomsday bad news that we're hearing about the environmental crises. But also, if they're like well taken care of, you know, on a personal level, they could be empowered to be the trendsetters and lead the way, because they can feel, you know, on a deep level how much things need to change, and then just immediately take action and take leadership roles. So I think it could go both ways. And here I want to talk a little bit about what I'm going to call eco-emotions. I'm mostly going to be talking about negative eco-emotions, kind of unfortunately. But the conversation about eco-emotions is becoming mainstream. There have been recently some statements by the big psychological organizations about it. And there have recently been a lot of studies looking at things like climate anxiety, ecological grief, and different other definitions of, basically all different definitions of environmental worry, I would call it. So that's my big question, I think. If HSP are more emotionally reactive, and if they're more susceptible, oh, I think I forgot to mention this, they're also more susceptible to depression and anxiety when they're not in a very well-supported environment. This is, it's very influential for HSPs when they're children. If they grew up in a well-supported environment, they're more likely to do really well and thrive. And if they are not in a supportive environment, they can tend toward anxiety and depression. So if that's true, that was a big thing for me to skip over, but now you understand why I'm concerned about how much they might be affected by the bad environmental news. So can we really also expect them to take more pro-environmental action? That's what I'm thinking about. Here's kind of I found online a big word cloud of all the different terms that are being thrown around and used, and they haven't really been settled yet, so people are using a lot of different terms to use different things. But to get us on the same page, the most widely cited definitions of eco-anxiety are a chronic fear of environmental doom, the generalized sense that the ecological foundations of existence are in the process of collapse, and non-specific worry about our relationship to support environments. So it is hard to define anxiety, I'd say. And I also wanted to mention that there are quite a few studies looking at how these eco-emotions play out or affect young people. So this was a really good study that came out last year in Nature, or in 2021, that surveyed 10,000 young people and asked them about what kinds of feelings of how worried they were about climate change, and 27% said extremely, 32% said very, and 25% said moderately worried. And when they were asked to name how it made them feel, they said sad, afraid, anxious, angry, powerless, guilty, optimistic, and indifferent. So I wanted to, so there is a lot of research happening on eco-emotions in young people. That's basically what I wanted to say there. And then, okay, so thinking about how this could affect highly sensitive people. So activation means how much an emotion can energize a person to take action or just inhibit them from taking any action. So depression is a deactivating emotion. It's unlikely to motivate action, if that makes sense to me. Anxiety is a more activating emotion, but it usually leads people to want to avoid the threat, so the flight, right, in the fight or flight. And anger is an activating emotion, and it's associated with get in there and fight. So this is a really interesting study that I've been thinking a lot about, that uses this idea of activation and then looks at, basically says it's the angry people who are getting out there and going to the climate marches. So that's very interesting to me too. And then this is the last study that I'm going to present, but this talks about nature connectedness and uses the term climate worry and looks at distress in the general population. And this was a study done in Australia after a big fire. So I think people did have that anxiety, was very real for them. But the study had very interesting findings, so that's why I wanted to share it. So it found that nature connectedness was positively associated with climate worry, and climate worry was positively associated with psychological distress. And taking collective climate actions were associated with taking collective climate action was associated with increased climate distress. What I'm trying to say is when they took individual actions, they felt less distressed, and when they went out and did something as part of a collective, they felt more distressed. So that's actually counterintuitive to what I would have thought, and it's an interesting finding. And these authors say in their conclusion that we need to protect the mental well-being of people engaging in collective environmental actions. Here they're talking specifically about climate. So that's interesting, and it basically just, for me, that means there's so much more to know here. We're like, this is the tip of an iceberg, and the more we look with greater nuance, looking at specific emotions, specific traits, and in different populations and cross-culturally as well, there's so much to explore there. So the specific questions I personally am interested in are highly sensitive people more likely to experience these eco-emotions? I think probably, but that research hasn't been done yet. And are highly sensitives more or less likely to experience pro-environmental attitudes and behaviors? So we know they have deeper connections to nature. We don't know yet if they experience eco-anxiety, eco-depression, and eco-anger more than an average person. So we don't know how that might mediate their relationships to their pro-environmental attitudes and behavior. I think that's fascinating, especially given that it's like a third of the population. And finally, I think the key question is what types of interventions might help highly sensitive people to foster pro-environmental attitudes and behaviors. So kind of like I was hinting at before, I think the highly sensitive people are probably going to fall into two groups. Those that are, have a history of being less well supported or are lower functioning or might get bogged down with environmental worry and that kind of thing. And the more well supported, highly sensitive people, I think, will be more likely to be leaders in taking sustainability action. But that's not set in stone also, right? We can do things, we can help support those people really well if we really understand how to do so. So if this struck a chord with you, I just wanted to say you might be interested in the book, The Highly Sensitive Person by Elaine Aron, or this website has great resources, and you can take the quiz, the full 27-item quiz there. And they have a new quiz that's designed for children. And there are therapists and counselors who specialize in working with people who are highly sensitive. And that's what I wanted to say. So I hope you have some questions.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. A really wonderful talk. It's something that is so fascinating and definitely resonates with many of us in the room.